Na cálaigh in na heol tronachtaigh as a dara cocaigh, bheith igealach na chailligh, bheith an na suíochaigh uamhasach.
It struck with a feral ferocity, with an appalling savagery that smashed minds and bodies into a stunned unknowingness.
Le elders héanaar seoladh chrúigh Alistair MacLean novel a hisaigh as na Sgeulaiche sa chás trí garafad. Chuid a novel sin id bhain Alistair MacLean na scríbhaiche leth t-saoghal, le na millean móra na leabhraichean gan Reic.
I wondered who those men might be. Those men I would have to kill. That person or persons who had murdered my brother and 6 other men on Drift Ice Station Zebra.
An Alistair MacLean novel was sold every 18 seconds of every 24-hour day, 365 days a year.
You hast fuach na convoys na tachneven. Leabhar mis, Ulysses Silmi. You hast de chrie bochgetich. Ik ammen. Le gaat chauns a skrivigs go. Ierkel sgeulach san siach. Han rotten er sin hast de chin bio for an nulak.
Ach bheith cuiteach skribhing an Sgeulaiche cool filmichen enjamal t-saoghal. Bhain aige is anjast, ca is cocaigh. Seo na chrúiche, och carichet novel, crinneach de Sgeulaiche an ceud agus feadhainn na Gael.
I don't write for myself. Many authors, if you can dignify myself, and those others with that term, write for themselves. I don't. I write for my public.
Cléiste chuid leabhraichean, bheith car cuiteach as a Sgeulaiche ag MacLean héin. Sé bhéarla a dànachd aice, sé Gael van. Agus gaat de háisí ag giúsach in na beòthail gus a Reic cód blian na gúis. Bheith na leabhraichean ag chotaraineach Sgeulaiche barach fiction na chabhór t-ùghdar sa bí-eile, ceud go le millean. Charafiús a bheach menam na héin tin suas le Sgeulaiche mar sin. Bhíodh seo ag cóirsteach díoch glantí MacLean, a seoladh an na siad is a bí tumh na halapa, áte i Reic.
I think of the wonder of sailing on a summer's dusk in the Western Isles, bathed in that magical quality of light, diffuse and limpid and wholly indescribable.
Le de bheith sin am dhéacaid in nuair se tua bheith me slúcaigh sláán na leabhraichean ag MacLean. Bhíodh me bhearthar tuiche riamrúta na patrime a léibh, achas teoidh lás a scáil agus oberdachaí bheith me se géirí téicheach go áte nas cúnarstaiche lán ca is cocaigh. Na bheith fisa man nuair san nach romid i tíanhanas a chateanú oberscrútaí cútramach san na prógram seo agus a lenta na Sgeulaiche an scoine ag MacLean a bheith tart uide flach go hain agus na millean ile.
Leave me se leor, ne háisich mi leabhar leor Alistair MacLean mis ró. Scocht is ag am cóvan Alistair MacLean no cal míon leorich inike. Bha mi stocha, mi seach blna géir, stocha ógstocha siach a rénig, mi seach na ógstocha. Agus géirich mi mat in sapain. Van hij zalig van hot in je haast, dan hatel no as a leapik go you. Agus ga mi shirig leor skelf. Leorich in van man wat hier wat tomotdag. Hoek me se machas a skelf of so laan leorich in moore. Hoek me iets mes Ulysses. Agus van mi nam anhin nam me groepig aan de pyjamas is dressing gang gevat se skeinelem. Je nog een melonien. Levige leor was so vat ken 3 uur in hietje. Agus golach mi van mi sin gelevig. In eich stad toch er maar zo'n bedrag is gewoon.
Sé Gael van an Alistair Stuart MacLean le fníambichen an an Gael. An dres fer de chéadhach le minister Nicholas na Halapa an dúramach Alistair MacLean, a rucu an na strachure de heolach tíiristeach, glé maithaid an nútaid an baunáid ag bhád náisianta. Get rugadh Alasdair an Glasgow, chapata me stúid ahaith Guillem go Eglwys an Demi, me 5,000 desaid inis. Hafis go beirtio láinte féinid falava Halach Glasgow, a stúid na Sgeulaiche le gas, no de bheith na vinistid idem sa chiad chocach. Agus sétio áte bhain san trúd dhílan árach, hier Alasdair seo an noch gewaarheid, waar Sgeulaiche, Sgeulaiche, 2 bliadhna a stúid raibh a Gael Demi.
He was ministered here and a few miles away at Dànachd. So the boys were brought up, 4 boys, that Alistair and my father were born in the manse there. The church was a kind of fundamental part of their life, particularly on a Sunday. You know, you were only allowed to read the Bible, and I think they were at church at least twice a day. This place never lost its significance for them, and the day that Uncle Alistair died, my mother came here with my father, and this is where he came to think about it.
Bithidh Alistair gan Sgeulaiche ag cóipr na gúis an na náilich clánach Ghiblein har a fach go Sgeulaiche.
My father was a very, very strict man, and he would not allow us to talk English. Until I was 15 years old, I was not allowed to talk English. I had to go to school, and I couldn't talk English until I was 8 years old. Then from the age of 8, age of 15, I was still not permitted at any time to talk anything except Gaelic inside the house. My father was a very kind, very generous man. He was a very, very good person, but he had this thing that we must all talk Gaelic. With the result is I now hate Gaelic, hate kilts, and anything to do with the Highlands.
Van Goepet wie gedurmig MacIlleathain is schermanige neune dieve. Ach gaga heen drama het koeltorsen tuintje avanse. Haravende kalf bunje, ach wat joch het allegaas rochutjumig aan de bij Alistair in de gaas suus. Aan de Shiatia karichet, sken Alistair ach trieplende diek, guliken deulig boulevasver. Geuchelen durmig MacIlleathain ag daiche tsanug le ruifallas de cheun. Hij de heerlijke vaske torres na Hicklische. Jemig en deulig een manse akar.
After my father died, when I was 15, I went to live in Glasgow, and it was a city that I came to detest to a very, very high degree. I love the Highlands. I was in the Highlands yesterday. But I don't think that I would ever care to go back and live there.
Gaan ik eerst nach dan ik datas na blianich in se valle voor, ach kan ja roenig die feadhainn. Ach, na feadhainn faalag sovrach, kan begaid as het broertjen af en narin. Na de haasige gokkig gaat de gaan alles te die kudem van realters. Goed hij enyam siers van de galach regal, agus gij enyamige go knuwe HMS Royalist. Long hockey le aramach utreme winde, het driach het tien kolungus an Arctic. Gij MacIlleathain da hurus ter Arctic, agus wij kudjachen lahe de genusi in de long hockey jeramatjach en tierpits, a vasjolig a kalle aan de nirvi.
He was a bit of a loner, actually. He was, a lot of them said he was a good man to have in a tight situation, but he was much a loner.
Waar Mark Simmons na heited marre, agus na utar leorige nid echtri in de jum. Ha leor ureke het torst immerag in de plionnige in waar MacIlleathain se galach riegal.
The only way we could send aid to Russia was via the northern ports, Murmansk, right in the north of Russia. And of course we had to go around Norway to the convoys did. And of course Norway was controlled by the Germans. So it was to send aid to the Russians. Ice would build up on the upper works of the ships, and they had to deal with it with axes and shovels and steam hoses. Very arduous, dangerous work. And of course there were tremendous storms in that area as well. And of course if they did get sunk and you were in the water, you had a a matter of minutes before you were frozen to death, basically.
No je gai blianach an sgeulachd gachanig MacIlleathain mór an ited mu bheith sa chocuch.
I made the foolish mistake of joining the Navy in 1940 when I was 17, 18 years old. And I stayed away for the next 6 years. Just came back and went to university, and that's it.
Suarach na veice di ra mu na gadich héin sa chocuch, a chud a chulatad et a rág is drochíte is cruatal an nachtig gan chiad novel skrive.
To keep a watch, especially a watch on the bridge, was torture. The first shock of that bitter wind seared the lungs, left a man fighting for breath.
No je ga a chavlach rígal, chai MacIlleathain go oleg laschu.
Honestly, it was the most time-wasting period of my entire life. I spent 7 years in university and I learned nothing.
Charadat anasach mu MacIlleathain mu naamseo, fuiach comedy waarheid, dámach go filmichen, lental skipper Rangers na je Willie Waddle na Rúna Gachgason, die Sgeulaiche seo, Gael opid stoudig, gunnig die Ballonnach ook, geemlich ieder gleva, agus trainig sonne vina hitcheid, a dat gema avestig. An de ligt te drie fós MacIlleathain se lemmen an de niklis chalm chile an de Glasgow, van de fause farenten schechplen de kier karichet ronneschen. Mijn naamsjo gaf bij MacIlleathain loop mee avestig. Als je blianichen in de convoys hoes as een nachtig, fause banna jarameltig Gisela Hendrickson, te vertine berichten junsig beurle. Gunnig het neva MacIlleathain na Albannach agus a couple de stourig agus wat an de t-saoghal. Stochen nach seo a bhain vi gewaaghe de kirga, seach gur a vraagheid John in de weeghaul a sapetne kerameltig eke som. A gegaan die weggewechtje, waar MacIlleathain a seo as a niklis a jechkin Alistair a posig Gisela. Fós Gisela ferjannig t-ùghdar as Sgeulachdan a seultin ceud na t-ùghdar aige gam spatig. Huaid Alistair opid a tickets beòthail an the Sgeulachdan flat an the Rutherglen, fóar Sgeulachdan na páiste Sgeul Stonelaw.
I wasn't a good teacher. I was a very good instructor, but I wasn't a good teacher. One has to be possessed of certain qualities, and one has to have a certain degree of this word dedication, which I lacked. And I knew then that I would never be a teacher. I tried, but I knew I wouldn't be.
Did he stand out in the school?
Not really. No, I wouldn't say he stood out. Just an ordinary teacher with no idea that he had these stories lurking in his head. It just didn't come over at all.
Rein Alistair is Gisela an dachi an the darúm huaid at ein maal uit rád tramsargard. Wijsen a kostner keer nog te ficht sa vias, sva ageidachke fiachan i pekan a chunegas is an teichannach. No de vauneke va Alistair is skrivig Sgeulachdan gudit. Chud a teústa go farpish as a Glasgow Herald.
I was not inspired. I was driven by financial necessity. This was back in 1955, I think, and I had to move house. I had to, as we say in Scotland, we had to flit. And I required £20 to pay for this flitting. Well, I didn't have £20. So, providentially, the Glasgow Herald came up with a competition for writing a short story. And there were various prizes offered, one of £100, one of £50, and two of £25. There were, I believe, quite a few entrants, but 960 people who tried for this. And I was one of them. And I was extremely lucky, because I'd hoped for the £25.
First prize, £100. The Dealers by Alistair MacLean, 33 Drumsargard Road, Burnside, Glasgow. Tá seo a dànachd a bheith go túr. Chanile a cínsig in seo nach rána siapdíhún nó ráf, agus go bétar gaibh fertisach í féped ors de staide gráich. Bhácht isan Sant MacIlleathain. Na bych gráich an gáil dúhile tá, stoch nach bisine clúindin díomh mú Alistair MacLean.
We've smack at Sgeulaiche Gerich on a sgeulachdan and the mix grieve there's me mochtjol agus garíði nar a leabhar how fechgin na fréving a kutchen rutin vig animal as na leabhraichean ag MacIlleathain harische Reic how feadhainn a seo sémas ground botach grúamach tuisiir na Gaeltoch ag bhfuil a bhata seo nílas agus a héin ag gaine roiin ha chorchan a scup ag a t-ùghdar a golamach an feadhainn amateur a sean behin the havelach va aige kan in riplach agus gneodag ag gúnsach chfuil a héin ag bhí teug hí sábhalach bethe níos fechcacha ar bethe níos chlonne a bhachgur teug sábhalach na héin.
Ba tí ann Marshall Chapmans na léamh is Sgeulaiche hanig na deod na súlan. Ba ré gopaid ag company feilseach William Collins, agus ba duineachge íon háast ga chosnagachcha an na roiin na Bíbel. Léamh Ian Chapman an nóirsin na Sgeulaiche agus cháirtaí chomadis go de chud fisco MacIlleathain fónaigh ag Collins, len fíocha go tíinead. Sé mach minister de bhana Chapman cúteoch colachtaí MacIlleathain agus bha tóir an nó thógalacha agus go raibh hata go rá díos na dìocharitin. Chúm Chapman na rádí MacIlleathain go becháidí a fiochan novelist scríbigh. Suair a choteonnach sa bha MacIlleathain,
He said, no way could I write a novel, but over the summer, over the months that he elapsed through that summer of 54, I discovered that he'd served during the war on the lower deck of the Royal Navy on the Murmansk run to Murmansk run. And so I persuaded him to have a shot at writing a novel based on his wartime experiences. And from that came HMS Ulysses, which was a phenomenon.
Onnoos gediach MacIlleathain is saas as a scríbigh, bei gopaid go cruai is go t-ùghdar.
I drew up a cross square, lines down, lines across. Chapters 1 to 15, and the characters coming down this way. And most of them died. In fact, only one person survived at the end of the book. And I had several characters in each chapter who, departed this life. And when I came to the end of the book, I found out that it was somewhat lopsided. There were too many people dying in first, 5th, 10th chapter. So I had to rewrite it to have an even dying space throughout. And I suppose it sounds very cold-blooded, very calculated, but sorry, that's the way I did it.
He again rang me and said, Ian, I've done it. I said, you've done what? I said, what have you done? And he said, well, I've written this novel. I've written it. And he said, would you like to come round and collect it? So I said, yes, of course I will.
In hier Sgeulaiche was skriefje HMS Ulysses by Alistair MacLean. Háisich Chapman sa bhain leabhar agus grummich áras sa bhat. Rin MacIlleathain sú a Sgeulaiche gan a hachar de chniúa long choci, steigte de chine vekis cruatal colungus an Arctic.
It struck with a feral ferocity, with an appalling savagery that smashed minds and bodies into a stunned unknowingness. Its claws were hurtling rapiers of ice that slashed across a man's face and left it welling red.
Da Ian Chapman as cún droin na Bíbel ag Collins agus chra útaras ag leabhraichean ailseach, chud siasa ga William Collins carich in the company an na Lúnain, who gis an uhúlaid agus úrsta candis go domiga millean, gan ditseid a cosnach céad nach de fichit sa bhías sé forstan a bha.
I still believe that HMS Ulysses is the best book he'd ever written. And the difference between that book and all the rest was he was writing out of personal experience.
Als nog nach begonnen go is het ja tachar. Maar dat is al een leven geljaar. Als je dat tachar check in Gaelic, gaan het her, gaan knap naar mavike een leven zien. or ha skrivig marke big en borre nog fóinteach seo a básach.
A stoi party spatal an na Lúnaine hug Alistair MacLean go aide scríbhichin is Sgeulaiche was Sgeulachdan galúflat a féuid. Gaf a héin sa vein a trénuintje I dashe Glasgow a go bige sa scol sa matin. Ba hulle collasam go bige berstich haast ach ver halis a griachlik alje. Va féin jana hug brennach rid HMS Ulysses ga chollachu di The Cane Mutiny agus The Cruel Sea a chará hulletinje an the lichtrichen moore waar daily record of scholarstich Lushke.
And since then, I have not paid very much attention to any reviews. I never have reviews. I haven't got one cutting. Oh, why should I? Because, okay, they went for me, and he may have been right. I don't know.
But you might be getting good reviews somewhere. In fact, I know you are.
Well, perhaps I am, but I don't see them.
Chará Uduch Levi ga luskich geta wat ga jammer na droven. Ba MacLean dagus na noch geleer aan de klá, ge féige geleer is aan ekete geschies, is aan mortgage is aan de dusha aan de Clarkston aan de Glasgow. Aan de liggende kees we zijn begin op belogen na 3 hier te nacht. Als de Collins ga miele nacht. Hug Reic an sechat 2 míle is an capital in Nochgach agus fé fer Albannach Robert Clark 10 míle nacht is an Corichen film. Agus as ciún na hullet at a bhain va ciatan de víltin a canach HMS Ulysses. Va gach cruai chas a gulig MacLean sa nachtig a waie trou met de chuine. Hiele gan nasach ráte uid na leabhraichean, agus na filmiche na hanna gaste.
Had sidig I ríist, grondhoorsen zijn met leabhraichean ik gesioch in voor, gendrachke. Athabasca had aan de Canada, is dat Canada's Alaska, aan opper na holler, ze ríist. Ha konderstan me hikke mooi. Ha konderstan de steig. Gaan jullie uit komen geworst. Hij wordt een oude keer tacht de hik net uit. Ik ga vuurse we al kim mag baris. Ik kunt de weg aan de konst.
Ganyan chomase Sgeulaiche novel gaat de scoot MacLean hikkesk. A chosheid verille schrijvig.
I started almost immediately, but 2 months afterwards. But I was still teaching at the time, so it took me some little time to write it. About 4 months or 5 months, because I wrote in the evenings and at weekends. I think I finished the book about 9 months after HMS Ulysses. And then I very promptly escaped and came out to live in Europe.
Is an darre novel ga ik go aartje getuurde ter jalletje, kuhan de kreke, aart illes rijd HMS Royalist as a chokkig. Gaat ich MacLean gynne loske na kreinig yn gwnars bewoon chunnig gawn, sech loske gwnnigchen, agus skrive leor tarnich me join. Ha skippe commando bedichtanich agus na halais, a fiachan I castal nazi gris, het Iran a chait dunne boeid, a cha gaf chorus míle seite de havalig, maar het at de gronchid. Va morgach donlach na haidheid agus na richtbetijd. Sjes in de derafgunje a wenig steeg of haske de nieden, ze had drie begiesing aan de Navarone.
Kun je maar shit kolok maar streep zoals een skidder.
Haroi gaat tonnen ze wij sgeulaiche. Pa oer na Gael mis moet je geroi bithidh gaan. Ach ik kan nou kriegnisch.
Zijn ik het bij de Alistair MacLean wat te gaan in de kaske gekke wat te gaan niet aan hoe groot is.
Va, ach roet de haan wat goede kaal. Wij gaan loer. De wij kiezen studie wat goede kaal het tol ik speed onbezag. Dus het doe heen, maar hier is streep Greek shit. Dan hoor ik me. Dan mis me gewoon heen Fydd sio wyomyn a charwaith donitid.
Sé bud is cutar mí chuna leorí míléin sé go bhfuil cúnastan. Agus go míú faracin chunaiste sin bhthaiseach go ddíirigh.
Tá dúnan buan de dhéananich mar is tíce. Cánach a feadhainn rud a dhéanú a chanadú bhug do dhéanke dhéanú. Annan cúnastú afasach. Cúnast, haar cúnast, haar cúnast, haar cúnast.
Tá tripla teann a fuasclaíon. Tá tripla teann a fuasclaíon. A cha bhut an háasta cear. Sa tripla teile noch go gníist sa bhut an le dín. Sa go chean hawl hála ceil sin mi chéile.
Ga je ra trip mag gelein nis kunim kuhuche she dooie wekke throw everything but the kitchen sink at the reader, then throw the kitchen sink at the reader, then throw the plumber at the reader. Agus summer shan gosige HMS Ulysses.
I've read that you describe your characters as stereotypes, but they must be sufficiently changing to keep up with public taste over 20 years. Do you see them as changing characters?
No, I just changed the names, that's all. They seem... They're not stereotypes. They're not entirely cardboard cutouts. And on the other hand, I don't pretend there's anything deeply psychological behind the portraiture. But the form seems to work, and it'd be rather silly for me to abandon it.
I suspect he knew he was the best at what he did, you know, because you couldn't have had sales like that and not thought, well, I'm doing something right.
So bblion na trífiche táisgad it filme yn y leor Ghiblein, le dich millean nocht ga chosgyd, san aniu y gamas film bithidh choáist.
The climb itself had been a nightmare, a brutal, gasping agony in the wind and the rain and the darkness. An agony that had eventually dulled the danger and masked the suicidal risks in climbing that sheer unknown face. It was a climb such as he had not ever made before, such as he knew he would not ever make again, for this was insanity.
Siop di afod yn y Greig y cynnwch yn Hactaran Gregory Peck agus David Niven, sparstian ffilm ga enwyd Elaine Rhodes. Han rwch y chrwyd MacIlleathain y torst bwy y gichan hawl.
I'm here at last, Mallory said to himself over and over again. I'm here at last. I've made it. And these are the Guns of Navarone. These are the guns I came to destroy, the Guns of Navarone. And I have come, at last.
Hwyd leor Ghiblein dŵlan môr rompus yn y iemig leid sbrehain ffwyd yn y chrwch son y ffilm. Nid yw leor ŵr o nochgyg fa Alistair MacLean, fa lwch yn ffilm dydych y laments. Dyn i'ch ffilmich yn goch diog yn y nofel yn eich.
Ach an y lun for about that yn y ffilmich yn môr i gyrir yn Hollywood. Dan is Sgeulaiche MacLean tirach maar son schön. Maar van daar ik het achke. Er zijn moeten er zijn jaren en de Sgeulaiche is een chin misschien kujok. A thriller se goper is naam is wel at. Had de goper le fason. Veel meer te wie fasante. Veel meer te wie korte die deunje. Maar bij de korte die deunje ik een naam gericht gu. Kiet milieu. Gaat je nu daar ik het rasken nog kwijtje. Zijn nervot vier mee in filmchen. Maar de fijne deunje zeggen in de cinema. Er staan film goed. Hij wordt naar het te halen. Gaat je nu film tillig. Maar schön, hij vindt een keer een paar keer een film nu en een film is er even. Maar je een voorstand, een rugkeren, je riet eerst filmen nu. Agus gaat tager schön, met een Sgeulaiche, een kerstkiek, een goede kort er is een negen feest, tastan, je kunt even anders een finish in de cinema. Er zijn gundige moeren Navarone, vechten je spreker, paar en krikken.
Va film sonrich te sgeulachdan, achar o caffeig voor se byd MacIlleathain i golca chet, kan I se boundary.
Yeah, I'm not coming over. I said, what do you mean you're not coming? You have to come over. No, I don't want that. So I said, Alistair, you'll be introduced to the Queen. And he said, well, I don't know. Will my mother be introduced to the Queen?
Oed y ceud ha MacIlleathain y t-ùghdar y fwn Sgeulaiche y gopri choma as y leor the Guns of Navarone. Gasgych calama, caran diafyd am y dŵ eigin. Gan môr an chance gyda as leabhar. Agus yn oersan, hef hein ymach gylcwtigyn ga ddra. Y farach ydy drama t-ùghdar y chwysieigyn, a ha cwmal y leabhar le anarna awch, ha MacIlleathain cwdiach y cwdiamach t-saoghal, co yn Gaelic ydy.
Sometimes there is a certain amount of indiscriminate violence, but that is always caused by the baddies, never by the goodies. And I think that in any book, if you have the goodies indulging in violence without any good reason at all, then I think that the person who's writing that book is using violence per se as a crutch to help him along. He needs something to help him along. And to me, this is not very professional, so I don't do this sort of thing.
Now, MacLean's baddies are evil, while his goodies, although ruthless, are always on the side of right. Do you think that belongs to this Presbyterian tradition here?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I don't think it was something they could shake off. I mean, my grandfather died when they were very young. I think my dad was about 8 or 9 and Alistair would have been about 12. But I think they had it very strongly instilled in them, the Presbyterian ethos.
Gaelic was dànachd the Guns of Navarone hwrs MacIlleathain go raibh chuid a chúl of the tigasc agus dal scríbhag lánúne. Hice héin agus Collins nach rána HMS Ulysses a chiad chéim slí feadhainn. Ha Don Sinclair an dasclaniche a Carper Collins na hachca bhuinistí MacIlleathain a Loracán.
And I love this next one.
Oh, yeah, this is one of my favourites. You can see here that Alistair is signing a book for this lady here. Obviously, you can see the joy on this woman's face that she's getting to meet Alistair MacLean. You can see it's for the Guns of Navarone, which was his second book, so from 1957. He's obviously quite enjoying it. He's probably out on a sort of a tour round of probably Britain, most likely, because as we know, he was immediately successful, so people would have wanted to visit and meet him and get their book signed.
Handsome guy.
Oh yes, I think he's rather dapper.
Jaag MacIlleathain agus event Glasgow an ben as constelle. Fatig halavan kiezen kostni traum peg aan de brichting. Waar karretjen mogelijk gero bekend strain mogelijk as de falsigachke. Gero tenke gemakierig MacIlleathain. Agus steunjer gerei trichke kirier steunje lischkelegaar. Schakine keramaltig was wenneke. Ach stalge vroeger senillewesh le eleket geleor gefasig grantje na share.
Mijn naam is nog een drisleor south by Java Head, waar Alistair, Gisela agus een machgalk aan een tuig die tuv Lake Geneva. Van naam ze big MacIlleathain na hastalach. Een glozet van een duwig agus van een dui leomer spatial gwaatjille. A gaat de hele dier vergalappen.
Danby is one of these numerous Scottish renegades. I'm afraid Scotland as a country does not appeal to me anymore. Now, Glasgow is my native city, but I have no affection whatsoever in the world for Glasgow. Whenever I go there, which I'm sad to say is as seldom as possible, I feel as Captain Scott felt when he arrived at the South Pole. He said, "Oh God, this is an awful place."
A gaat de jeugnig MacIlleathain die we heel harritjen is Marshall Chapman.
Alistair clearly loved and respected my parents, and they clearly loved and respected him, despite some of the times that, obviously, at some level it was a partnership, but it was a business partnership. But there was a deep-seated and really quite profound friendship. I mean, basically, my father would do anything for Alistair. And in the end, I would suspect that Alistair felt the same way.
If he and Chapman hadn't persuaded you to turn that short story into a novel, what would you be doing today, do you think?
I would probably be a headmaster in a school that was not recognised or acknowledged anywhere in Britain.
Chrúige is chríochnaigh MacIlleathain leor, tewn, carach, beòthail an na trí miasan. Ach bheith curé nach scríbhigh unan gach bliadhna, chanige nach gach barach de senne Reic.
I can remember when I was quite young going to the shop in the village we stayed in, Ballantor, to get my father a birthday present and seeing this display of books and seeing Alistair MacLean, and I thought, oh, he likes him, I'll get one of those. So I actually bought a paperback and went home with it, and my mother was so annoyed that they'd sold it to me because, of course, we had a whole, bookcase full of signed first editions in the house. As I got older, I sort of understood a bit more, and the first time I remember meeting him, I remember being really surprised that this person who was a name on the television and on the books and everything was just this very ordinary looking man who just dressed like my dad and was a wee bit smaller and very quietly spoken and things. So, gradually I became more aware of it. One time I was on holiday visiting Uncle Alistair in Dubrovnik, and we were out on his boat, and I was lying on the deck reading a Neil Gunn novel, and he kind of looked at me and he said, "How many of my books have you read?" I said, "None, So he presented me with a copy of HMS Ulysses and said, have the first 100 pages of that read by tomorrow, or you're sacked as my niece." So.
An na drífiche t-saoghal chuir t-ùghdar bhí Ghiblein an gúil dis an Ileabhais, schaid go taimór an na Surrey. Sean ferre scríb uid suar a choté als a bhéir scríbig, hús da tourist I Pepperneach.
I'm not a literary person. If someone offered me £100,000 tax-free, I'd never write another word.
Agus heb nach de scríb a steu t-ùghdar an na noch bliadhna, smuinich go gorstagadis hí na ástaid, agus cheannich tá sinse Jamaica in.
Sé feadhainn ha Ástahan, bhíh smugglaidin trích getólan na lá agus rin Daphne du Maurier in Amale. A chan yn y ceanlachin lichtrachal a bithidh MacIlleain, beth yn y mianach go bych grúnd hen Ástaice, schiannich ferrile agus ferrile. Stochanach triach yn Ástaide a röne begelichtje de a bhechatíoch I de drama, go dearabh chat a hydebich gráin leis, agus huic MacIlleain me bheith géirí elegant mór a chosnach go féimige tílich go scríbig. A steu 3 bliana na Ástaid híle chun na leabhraichean.
Chuid MacIlleain dreach scriptfilm met céad gan na leabhraichean ag héin, sé chuir Eagles déir a ferris a Amala. A clúich na pníamh characterin var Richard Burton, Clint Eastwood agus actor Albannach Mary Ure. Bhí an film anichte mar isimplar sáirite I heirse, va trífichid sa cóicnar a deanú na clésan cúnarstach a náte na actorin, hug sennet Burton as Eastwood in am eilehorsta de film, chuir doubles déir.
An I gascich ag MacIlleain am I gryd gyma ffrigarach gan y cinema gan am gwydiog. An I sgeulachdan ciú, go gyn níise y screenboard. Ach, bad gwydiog yn generéir se clésiche fawn gan am, se clésiche fa cordrid yn gan am, Richard Burton agad Clint Eastwood agad gís ag diffyd ire gan am, ach gís fa chocearst as na dríachan agus na roles agus a film a sin. Agus a bheith chocolach na character an achar I character na bhanóci an na grónsgeulach gan am crutch ag Alistair MacLean.
Nach go film an na drífichid sa núg, cha féin gan Gealdach Rígal chun na chiad Sgeulaiche, hu de voorwanligs na pepein, agus waar gen weg gan film a hisse geban. Van skrivet dat den echt perstich gadidio, agus rinne soos 1 kilo an Ileabhais for nach dikker kieschen kostniet.
He was very, very generous, and he would always, but it was always at a remove almost. This watch, for instance, he gave me when I was 18, which is a very long time ago now. But my sister and I had gone over to visit him in Dubrovnik, and we were meeting him the first night at our hotel at, I think it was like 6:30 or something. And we were already there on the terrace when he arrived. And this was outrageous because surely we were early because he was never late. He said, we must be early, and he demanded to see our watches. And I wasn't wearing a watch, and my sister Mary showed him her watch, and he declared that her watch was fast because otherwise he would have been there before us. And 2 days later, these Cartier watches arrived, and we were presented with them, not by him, but with by Avdu, the local man who kind of fixed everything for him. You know, so he had ways, he was extremely generous, but it was seldom him who handed over the gift or anything. He would have somebody else do it.
You're a man whom, as we know, has become rich through his work. Has that improved the quality of your own life, do you think?
Who has told you that I'm rich?
Now, in television interviews, he comes across almost as suspicious, even slightly crusty. Is that how he was with you and the family?
He had a real sense of humour, you know, and quite a very dry, kind of particularly Highland sense of humour. I think that, you know, my dad and his brothers all shared, and there's a kind of underlying, almost a kind of sarcasm, and you can see it in his books, the way men speak to each other. So he wasn't crusty, he just didn't suffer fools gladly, and he didn't like a lot of flannel, you know, a lot of hyperbole, and I suspect out in the publishing world and in television and things like that, and in the film world, I suspect he was subjected to an awful lot of hyperbole and flannel, which he would have known wasn't authentic, you know, so.
Beòthail Alistair MacIlleathain drama, ach feadhainn an eistec t-ùghdar tripleithe.
I sat up, careful of my still, stiff neck, fished a bottle of whiskey from a cupboard, poured a drink, watered it, knocked it back, and then, because it was illegal, I helped myself to another.
Well, are we talking about when he was sober? Or were we talking about when he was drunk? Because he was not Alistair when he was drunk. Very, very modest. And yet when he got the booze in him, he became a different person. And it's very sad to watch that.
Gaians na bheith Gael, Reic Alistair leabhar scríobh an na t-ùghdar.
What is your working day?
It's long, 13 hours, 14 hours, until my mind stops working, or until I start making some silly mistakes on the typewriter, and I know I've had enough. But 6 hours sleep and you start off again.
And how many weeks to finish a novel?
Well, average a month, sometimes 5 weeks. I've done one in 17 days.
I remember visiting him when he lived in France, and he was sitting on the sofa with his eyes shut, and my younger brother and sister were playing in the middle of the room, and my mother said to them, keep the noise down, children, your uncle's sleeping. And he kind of opened one eye and said, their uncle is not sleeping, their uncle is working. He was sitting there visualising this story or working out this story, and I know that he never started writing until he knew exactly how the story would end.
Scríobh MacIlleathain script film gan rugadh Americanach Elliot Kastner, a lenten go tlú de leabhar when 8 bells toll.
Van hier hoiseach a dada glachcuch an príomh character agus a guna dhís. Cóha go guna dhís agus gursáin. Ach an nóir ná gionsach go bhfuil an duine marabh. Gursáin an duine seo marabh. A Sgeulaiche gata glachcuch van hier hoiseach.
Ba MacIlleathain eolach in múla agus idir bhí seolag as na huiscichan man gúirsta nélaid. Ba sein charraina éunach gur an na seo as a chia an na tuppervóide a hanig a doprichi diaver ag a rialtas Philip Calvert tíd agus a raunsachach dé hachad gan na bhata caracú agus a 9 millean nocht an na buin ád a bheith Sgeulaiche. Sé Anthony Hopkins a bheith Calvert ag an amsin bheith dúine na beòthail échcin i d t-ùghdar. Sé'n seos a character a bheith tríoch ag MacIlleathain a bhan na Calvert, dúnte, diaver, absach an héin agus scaiteach i de henge.
Nuach bron na díag as deo pása go seo na glascú an na Nicholas St. Columba, Gaelic, Alistair MacIlleathain agus Gisela Hendrickson, agus go deará chanán go ré. An na trífichitse gáíag fás díist san na daratúras, banna rangach a bheith ríbin a rugadh film, Mary Marcel Georgius. Fásat an na nofis clári an na lúnain tíhúne an drisla díag na dáver.
Pásaigh nach de goprich van dosach. Ymysg characyn Ghiblein va driver Reic Jackie Stewart sa vein Helen, va sgríomhaithe smóinneach gydanegus an actor film to Stewart.
I am looking for something to replace motor racing in a way, and I think this is one of the reasons that Alistair, I'm sure he won't say this, but I'm sure it's one of the reasons that he's written this.
May I interject?
Yes.
This was written totally for Jackie, nobody else.
Had rinneag díobh film The Way to Dusty Death idir rátabdín le Jackie Stewart. Get rinneag film television ficket blian na steugan sgeulach nochu an na glá. Harro an braseig le Jackie Stewart dat na ceud na bhabásig le Mary Marcel Georges.
A disaster, to put it mildly. She was completely obsessed by Hollywood, and they persuaded him to buy. At one stage, he owned 2 houses. One was the previous house of Boris Karloff, and the other house was previously owned by Marilyn Monroe.
Chai MacIlleathain sa vein na gúideach as a dheivór seo on the Beverly Hills.
Do his moods change when he's working?
Oh, yes, immensely. He can be terribly grumpy when he's behind a typewriter. But then he's very lovely the minute he leaves it. So it's like being married to 2 persons.
Aren't you lucky?
Yes, in some way, I suppose so.
2 husbands.
Yes.
Bigamy?
Virtually, yes.
Do you know that you get grumpy when you're writing?
In point of fact, I don't agree with my wife's assessment. Is that just I don't like being interrupted?
I don't interrupt you, Alistair. I mean, one has got to bring him a glass of milk and a sandwich when he writes, but even then, he doesn't like to be interrupted at all. But I do interrupt him.
Alistair, do you discuss the plots at all with Marcel?
Nope. I don't discuss my plots with any person.
Occasionally in the evening, you tell me about few of those people you invent in your mind.
Oh, yes, but I don't discuss.
Va evigus einrit geleor sy'n dachi, va sy'n trichlan diolch agus feragach leis. Va eisiau cosgal sfedirag gyro feadhainn. Va charactynson yn nawrus gynnyhew gorisio fi chodionwch glwysyd gael California gyroi'n dŵl gyffegi barach gaegat i hen na dialich i gad hawl sien. Hwst Elliot Kastner na chroindiach ansioch gyn yrwyd grin doial nio uasol modiwyn. Va Kastner yen weg gyro MacIlleathain ga funsien i'ch hen le diolch, ga hewndag na gloich de grwnger gyn blach. Hwyd e officegaig Studio 20th Century Fox, verbwrn ga sgrifig.
Fairchild interrupted, one more vexation added to his sea of troubles. Damn you, Deacon. That's my whiskey.
You're pretty free with your theories, Mr. Deacon. And my whiskey.
Without a word, and without warning, Pierce stepped forward and savagely struck Deacon's right wrist, sending the glass flying.
She Bricard Pass yn gerw sgript ffilm Sgeulaiche agus a fermagedig, came ure van ga, Western.
The fact is, Major, we have a killer aboard.
Yes, we have.
Y ganyan y fi an the crew Western, va hwlwyd a dawn gys a rodŵl o MacIlleathain, lwben y sniaf trwy'n sgial, character yn y llast o siolta, tahrstas yn beòthail, agus cánraich scatiach.
Deacon said, "Don't do it. Don't make me make history. Don't make me the first man in history to kill another with a Winchester repeater." Pierce, who had recovered the most quickly of the 3, hurled himself to one side, bringing up his repeater. Deacon's gun boomed. Deacon said, "I think that's enough history for one day."
Jins yn dasgladnig e Collins, Dawn Sinclair go, gron ganig bunifele y jenig MacIlleathain, edrych chew yn y dynia fatisach yn y leabhraichean ys on y Reics na statian.
He felt that they weren't reading the story correctly, I would say. And he says here, SV, so Sam Vaughan, complains that he can't tell the goodies from the baddies. He's not meant to. When did Agatha Christie ever finger the butler halfway through the book? So, as ever, he is hilariously funny, has the best way with words, and still making the point that he's not happy with how these corrections are being suggested.
Hollywood represented all the things that he disliked most. I mean, this display of money, this insincerity, this hypocrisy. These were the things that he had no time for at all.
Va bricart pas cosrichte do Mary Marcel, ach va MacIlleathain yn impish Sgeulaiche agus garrig posi I hirig sa chúst. Va Mary Marcel crack féimigische barach Egedein, njo gael sig hi leor kinsche hula nípe huorige mun bé conlach. Hust verloigvich gelendie nach eigi datje. Va leorichin le Alistair MacIlleathain sier nochkig. Feadhainn skrive heen, feadhainn fer de grúige Sgeulach, ach tíoch nicht kutikinillat. Gase heenes Giselle na slúje ach hjult I fásig san darre turus. Hust ik rota huved, nader te Jekyll as Hyde. Hij suller zijn makkeluf sjau dat trifiget se siatiek, chamachel se vet en chanig beluge se grane wekket.
And what about fame? You tend to steer away from appearing on television, so obviously that doesn't interest you.
No, it doesn't. This is not meant as an insult to you, but I don't like it very much. I don't like publicity very much.
Why?
Because there are many people, you are a rare exception, who tend to get very personal and to try to find an angle whereby they can knock me. Well, I don't like being knocked any more than any other person does. Because if you are successful, there are always people around who want to chop you off at the ankles. Human nature, envy, jealousy, I don't know what. But I've found it far too often.
I don't think he was particularly comfortable with the fame aspect of it. I think he was quite a private person, really. But as to, you know, I don't think money made him any happier than money makes anybody.
Le auch carichet novel charodoi nach rafeun na bear, ach wil unan a ùghdar os t-ùghdar.
I think most people see HMS Ulysses as his best book, and in some ways I think that's inevitable because you're going to put the best of yourself into your first book, really. I think the writing is exceptional. You can read it and you find yourself almost in tears several times, but being able to make you more or less fall in love with a ship is quite a tremendous achievement, and a lot of people have said to me they think that's his best book.
Ma how géirí sealag a seirse bethe bheith muintir a chaúlaigh rial agus muintir a chaúlaigh bharsanta cuiteach ans na cuantan go tua cha fuair, cha cunarstachs, cha scrisal sa bheith cúsin agus rút munach roisin cúil cleintin cús. A scríbh an an dói uabhasach macht menamnel le cuiteach na bheith haus a chunig cha naich tú na beòthail Alistair MacLean.
When my mother and father gave me HMS Ulysses and then the rest, the Guns of Navarone and so on and so forth, there began my love affair with books, and it's thanks to Alistair. And writing style or no writing style, he is a great storyteller. And the fact of the matter is, once you pick up an Alistair MacLean book, you can't put the wretched thing down.
Va leor me jedig MacIlleathain centenary lán lúpan is drama a chumig a leabhar virrin. Plain le luch aramach nucleusach, bain henne in impish spreag, tsunami, agus geurig nucleusach a gutich kudaska sloge duur. A mochku leor haricheteke, a Sgeulaiche muste nochke. Sgeulaiche Alistair MacIlleathain a steu srete stroken in de darre laaien jeram keetviege te schech, ga je heerlijke as een jillewesh. Ga door de soel like glees fechkin sktivige ook verrosnige heen is hillevig. Shona, niene vraagheid, S.G. MacLean.
What do you think the uncle that sat you down on the couch and asked you what you were going to do with your life, what do you think he would have made of it?
I think he would have been pleased. I think he would have taken some time out to tell me who I was to trust and who I wasn't to trust and what I was to believe and what I wasn't to believe. But I think he would have been pleased that there was a tradition being carried on, if you like. I think he would probably have tried to help me and use his influence in a way that I would have not been comfortable with as well, you know. I'm sad that neither he nor my father nor any of that generation lived to see that I was published, but I'm glad that I was able to say, well, I did it myself, you know.
Istearach a Sgeulaiche chruinnig deolach agus a charit in a show as a Nicholas an the Demi is brúich an navenarin son silivas crínechi. Lenne dát show fatta bé agus futar of a cíndeach gran sa sgeulaiche ha show a bithidh de bhá.
I have only to smell a primrose, and I'm back again, on the banks of the River Nairn in Inverness.
Sgeulaiche darpen ag MacIlleathain bliadhna ré. Ach musta bhásachí níosach gan na Sunday Mail gynne rugadh van a bhíh gatochad. Chu seo uabas I de cháirstein agus a charitin. Ach bhar an nuaid cha búrin gan MacIlleathain a go lasáicheach neo a go luch a dhéana chlú.
Het bien feadhainn optíach was na casat in a gag Mary Marcellid, chanil ticus a bí gynne fer a bhain le móran a tenú trucha, vi a gúneach a niuchfar diús in a bascid, ach a tos tollach gan a millean. Mi hen a misk.
He's given pleasure, enjoyment to millions and millions of people over the years, and that's something that should be acknowledged.
Should 21st century readers be getting into Alistair MacLean?
I think the ones that haven't would enjoy it very much if they enjoy a good adventure story. And I know quite a lot of people still do read him, because a lot of people will come up to me at book events and say, you know, my dad read him or I read him when I was younger, and I will have adventure story contemporary writers say to me they're influenced by him in the way they write and things. So I think there's definitely still a place, yes.
An na drífiche sa hochtíag, ní sé ga pepperneach an na Chicago, nach reisminich go rab bheolach I rabba, agus go Berlaisi scríbig an na Gaelic, nach bu sgeulaiche, HMS Ulysses, agus Sgeulaiche Navarone.
Seo blasad gan scríbig a gúteach a bhír noch go bhia.
Farandeach yn Ulysses, chai yn bas na gosh. A chad a fwn yn bas I hein. Se long helach a víntse. Long helach. Taish linge. Agus sé Arctic a dachi. Leim wasid Gael tinne suas na kiet an froyen. Traugarach at a snaiche. Nar a spín an spreg icolach a chrí amach a dainach T-ùghdar Navarone.